Do you know what brings a man to his knees? It is not age, but the moment when your own son-in-law throws a full glass of red wine onto your chest, right in front of your daughter, as if you were nothing but a freeloader, and then shoves you down the frozen steps for the whole neighborhood to see. And I still remember the feeling of my back hitting the stone ground, the Cabernet soaking into my shirt, mixing with the smell of ice, and his eyes, not angry but filled with absolute contempt, for a man he believed was too old to keep anything. If you are reading these lines, I want to send you my sincere thanks. And if you believe that justice can be pushed down but cannot be held down forever, leave a single, and tell me what city you are in. Your presence is the reason I keep digging through each layer of truth until the web of lies collapses under the weight of its own guilt. So walk with me. Late February in Denver always has the kind of cold that makes you remember things you thought you had forgotten. The sound of my wife's heels on the wooden floor, the warmth of the old kitchen, or the tiny hand of little Riley wrapping around my pinky whenever she feared the snow wind. That morning the snow fell thin as chalk dust, drifting diagonally across the office window, and the wind blowing down from the top of Silver Ridge made a long whistling sound like metal vibrating deep inside a mine. I stood alone in the small meeting room, my hand touching the edge of the geological map hanging on the wall. The map I drew 30 years ago with thin veins and reddish-brown patches, marking where the ore veins ran under layers of stone. A map I kept rolled in a plastic tube for many years, carrying it from the South Ridge station through 3 winters, 1 mine collapse, and 1 radio blackout night when no one knew if I was alive. And now it sat in a wooden frame, neat and far too beautiful compared to the way it came to life. "Are you ready, Mr. Ellington?" Mrs. Lowell's voice was gentle but carried an unmistakable seriousness, and she wore a dark blue sweater, her silver hair tied back, her eyes sharp like someone who had seen far too many deals that people thought they could slip past her. I turned back and nodded, though my hand still held the frame's edge like it was the last anchor to my past. Across the table, Riley sat waiting, with her hands clasped together, palms pressed against the wooden surface as if she were holding something too fragile. She wore a cream sweater, and her hair was tied low, and she looked exactly like she did 15 years ago, when she first stood before me and said she wanted to study energy, not mining. And I didn't stop her, I just said, "As long as you keep the precision this field demands." Today I hoped she would keep more than precision. Sitting next to Riley was Brent Parks, neat to the point of seeming artificial, with a gray suit, deep blue tie, stiff collar, and a freshly shaved face without obese single nick. And his eyes moved like a scanning device across the wall, the table, and then rested briefly on the metal file cabinet in the corner. So old the paint chipped off at the edges, but inside it held the first printed contracts of my company, reports and handwritten notes I wrote at midnight, things I saw as keepsakes, but others might see as assets. A smile appeared on Brent's face, bright, pretty, the kind people expect from a sales director representing mining suppliers in the Silver Ridge region, but it had a space right in the middle, a hollow smile, as people in Colorado say. I sat down, and Mrs. Lowell opened the file, white pages and straight black lines, and I knew them better than the mineral veins underground, because today I was giving away 35% of my company, 35% of my life. "You can start signing here," Mrs. Lowell said, and I picked up the pen and heard the metal touch the paper, and my heart beat one slower beat than usual. It wasn't regret, it was the realization that when a man grows old, what he fears most is not losing money, but losing the things he built with his own hands. I signed page 1, page 2, page 3, each stroke like a small cut, painless but deep, and Riley signed next, her hand slightly trembling, but not her eyes. And Brent signed last, fast, sharp, certain, as if his signature carried no weight at all. When he looked up, that smile returned. "Our family has to think long-term, Marcus. Just let us handle everything about the company in this house. In Denver, that sentence sounded light, but to someone who spent a lifetime monitoring underground pressure, it felt like the soft sound of rock cracking. Mrs. Lowell's stamp hit the paper with a thud that echoed through the room, like a hammer striking a mine shaft, and when we stepped outside, the snow had grown heavier, the sky gray as shale, and the road toward Golden blurred in the fog. "Come home for dinner with me," I said. "Roast chicken, mashed potatoes. Riley's favorite." She smiled, and Brent smiled too, but the two smiles were two different things. My wooden house in Golden lay quiet on the slope overlooking the darkening valley, a place I had lived for nearly 3 decades, through one marriage, one career, and winters when the snow piled up to the windows. I opened the door, the smell of dry pine wood, cold ash, and a hint of peppermint oil drifting out, the smell of the many years I had lived alone. I lit the fireplace, and the flames, reflected on the wall, lined with old geological maps, making them look like living veins of stone. I seasoned the chicken, boiled the potatoes, and mixed the salad, all so familiar that I did not need to look. Riley once asked me, "Why do you live alone in such a big house?" I did not answer, not because I did not know, but because sometimes a person can only live in a place where what has been lost remains. When the doorbell rang, night had fallen. I opened the door. Riley stood there, cheeks red from the cold. Brent stood behind her, his eyes scanning the house, not in the way one remembers, but in the way one appraises. They stepped inside. I hung their coats and turned back to the kitchen, but when I glanced over my shoulder, I saw Brent looking toward the file cabinet with an expression that lingered one breath too long. Just one, but enough for me to feel it, a very small crack. And in my line of work, even one hairline fracture is enough to bring down an entire rock wall. That night, I did not yet know it, but Silver Ridge knew. Old mountains always know before people do. All I heard in my head was a faint sound like shifting ore veins beneath the earth. Something is beginning. That evening, my wooden house in Golden warmed faster than usual. The fireplace popped, and its glow spread across the wooden walls like the last scraps of winter sunlight. The smell of rosemary roast chicken drifted from the kitchen, with hints of lemon and roasted garlic. I set the 20-year-old oiled pine dining table, placing on it 3 white plates with blue rims, the set my wife always used for honored guests. I did not call tonight a celebration. I just wanted it to be an anchor point, a warm moment before everything turned a new page. But sometimes what we want and what life wants are 2 entirely different roads. Riley helped me pour water into the pitcher. Brent stood by the window with a bottle of Pinot Noir, watching the snow fall in big clusters that tapped softly against the glass. "Beautiful," he said in a flat, scripted tone. "Snow in Golden is always prettier than Denver." I only gave a faint smile. Sometimes the prettiest things are what hide what is coming. When we sat down, the atmosphere was light at first. I served Riley the chicken breast she liked and told her about the time I had to sleep 2 nights in a container at South Ridge because a snowstorm blocked the road. Riley laughed, a real laugh, warm and sweet like when she was a child, clutching my hand whenever there was a storm. Brent laughed too, but his laugh was the kind people give when waiting for their turn. As for me, I felt something tightening, like pressure building on a rock face, needing only the slightest touch to collapse. Not because the food was cooling or the story was ending, but because the air was growing heavy in a way only someone who has dug tunnels can understand. Something was about to blow. And then Brent set down his wineglass, tilting his head slightly as if about to make a business proposal. "Marcus," he said, the smell of Cabernet faint on his breath, 35% only scratches the surface. We've been thinking about the long-term future." I looked up. "What future?" Brent gave a faint smile. Riley stared at her plate. A future where the company, the assets, and this house belong to someone capable of expanding, developing, and taking Ellington. Consultancy to another level. I set my fork down. This house? I asked. Marcus, Brent shrugged. If you've started dividing, why not finish it properly? Riley looked up, her lips pressed tightly but offering no objection. I spoke slowly. I gave my daughter 35%. Not so my son-in-law could stand up and demand more as if I owed you both. Brent chuckled. We're not demanding. We deserve it. Then he leaned back and spoke in a lowered voice, clear enough to cut through the air. You've got $1.6 million in hand, but you can't run it much longer. Silver Ridge needs someone young, fast, and connected. I am. I raised an eyebrow. And according to you, the solution is what? Brent lifted the Cabernet, swirling it lightly. You sign over the rest, the house too. Golden is prime real estate. I know buyers. A chill ran through my back, though the fireplace was roaring. I'm not dead yet, Brent. Nobody said you were, he shrugged. But in mining, sometimes you have to withdraw at the right time. Riley remained silent. The bitter silence was not from having nothing to say, but from choosing which side to stand on. I looked Brent dead in the eyes. You should remember this is still my house. Brent smiled. That smile was the exact shape of the tiny crack I had once seen in a vein map. Small, smooth, but deadly. Then he lifted the Cabernet. My apologies. And he flung the wine. A streak of dark red shot across the table and splattered onto my shirt like a slash of blood. The glass hit the table and split into two with a dry crack that echoed through the house, which had always been peaceful. Everything froze. Riley shot to her feet. I thought she would defend me. I truly believed it. Believed that the small hand I once held through every storm would be enough to pull her heart back to her father. But Riley looked directly at me, her eyes so cold even the fire could not warm them. Dad, you're holding on to things that don't belong to you anymore. It felt like someone dragged a blade across the wooden floor. I stood, my shirt soaked with cold wine. Outside, I said. Brent smirked and slid his hands into his pockets. Good idea. I stepped onto the porch. Night wind sliced the skin. Snow fell lightly. The street lamp cast a dim glow across the wooden steps. Brent followed. I was turning back when the door behind me suddenly slammed open. Hard, intentional, violent. I lost balance, slipped, and crashed down the steps. Snow burst upward. A 66-year-old body does not endure falls like that. I heard the door close. Riley stood inside, pale-faced, yet not coming to help me. Next door, two neighbors stood under their awning watching. They did not dare approach, but in their eyes I saw something worse than pity. Judgment. Brent stepped beside me, crouched, not to help. He only spoke one sentence, clear enough to shatter. Something inside me. In Silver Ridge Basin, assets don't belong to someone too old to hold them. Then he straightened, buttoned his coat, and walked back into my house, where the spilled wine still streaked across the wooden table. I lay there in the snow, listening to my heartbeat crack, like rocks deep in a mine. 2 weeks after that snowy night, Golden sank into a quiet that was hard to describe. Not the quiet of winter, but the quiet of a place that just witnessed a small earthquake no outsider could yet feel. My wooden house stood still beneath the pine canopy, morning sunlight catching on thin layers of snow and making them glitter like thousands of broken glass shards. I had scrubbed the Cabernet stain off the table, but the wood still held a dark patch with a strange shape, like a wound stitched up far too late. I thought everything would calm down. I thought Riley would call and say it had all been too tense, that she did not want things to go that far. But I was wrong. That morning I was sawing a new plank to replace the broken step when I heard the UPS truck stop at the gate. The delivery man's footsteps sank deep into the snow. A thick envelope with a red border and the seal Golden District Court. Summons. One look at the seal and I understood. I tore it open. The paper inside was smooth, new, and cold. Parks vs. Ellington. My name sat in the defendant's box. Brent's name was on top, and right beneath it, Riley's name. Quiet like a shadow, I could not peel off. I turned to the next page. The words struck my eyes like a hammer hitting stone. Financial exploitation. Unfair compensation. Withholding family assets. I stood in the yard, wind hitting my face, but what chilled my stomach was not the cold. They accused me of exploiting my own daughter financially, of unfairly compensating my son-in-law, of hoarding family assets like a greedy man. I had to lean against the house to breathe. Then came the demands. Demand 1, transfer ownership of the Golden House, valued at roughly $700,000, to Riley and Brent. Demand 2, transfer the remaining 65% of Ellington Mineral Consultancy to them, worth more than $1 million. I read it again, each word slicing at my eyes. They did not want reconciliation. They wanted to erase me from my own life. That afternoon, I went to the office of Alan Kruger, an old friend, a lawyer who had helped me through 3 mining land disputes, back when I worked for Silver Ridge Mineral Authority. He still wore the round, black-rimmed glasses, hair silver and cut close to his scalp, his voice low and steady like a truck on a mining road. He read the file for a long time without speaking. "It's that bad, Alan?" I asked, my voice rough. He set the papers down, removed his glasses, and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Marcus," he said, "I know you're a good man, but this lawsuit is different." Different? How? Brent isn't some amateur. I've heard he has a lobby group from Silver Ridge Tools backing him. He knows plenty of people in the county office. I was silent. Alan sighed. "I'm not saying you're wrong or right, but you're up against an organization, not just a rotten son-in-law. You need to wait." "Wait?" I repeated. "Alan, they're suing me for stealing my own property." "I know," he said softly, "but if you walk into a hearing right now, you'll lose. Golden County Court isn't as impartial as it was 5 years ago." I shook my head and stood. "Alan, I never thought Riley would let this happen." He didn't answer. He only put a hand on my shoulder, heavy, sad, and alone. That night, I didn't turn on the lights. I sat alone in my office, the street lamp outside casting long yellow streaks across the wooden floor. On the wall, my old mine maps hung in silence, the South Ridge Basin map from 1994, the geological cross-section from 2001, the extraction plan from 2010, all drawn by me. Every pencil stroke, every ink line, every symbol marking a vein were years of strength, health, and youth I had spent. And now they said I was withholding family assets. I sat down, my hands clasped. Outside, the lights of Golden blurred in the distance, perhaps because of the fog, perhaps because of my eyes, or perhaps because the years of fairness I once believed in were slipping away. My heart felt heavy like an unmined ore block, pressure beneath it, heat beneath it, darkness beneath it. And I understood this was not the collapse. This was only the crack. A small crack, quiet, but enough to warn that a major cave-in was coming. I did not know when. I only knew that night. For the first time in many years, I heard Silver Ridge call my name. It was not the wind, not the snow, but the sound of something deep beneath the earth, the sound that warns something is about to be exposed. On the morning of the first hearing, Silver Ridge in Golden was covered in a fog so thick I could not see the street lamp 10 meters away. The sky was filled with leaden clouds, the light strangled, making the county building, a square concrete block built in the 1980s, look like an abandoned mine wall. I arrived early, not because I hoped for anything, but because I did not want to see the pity in the court staff's eyes if I walked in late. In the main hall, Brent and Riley were already there, talking to a familiar man, Richard Calhoun. I stopped when I heard their laughter. the laughter of men who know they stand on the side of power, the kind of laugh I had seen from mine owners 30 years ago. Calhoun turned when he noticed me. He wore his judge's robe, half buttoned, half open, as if someone had just reminded him to look formal. But the eyes could not lie. Those were the eyes of a man who had sat at the same table with Brent more than once. I heard Brent whisper to him, "We hope you'll go easy on us." Calhoun patted Brent's back, a familiar gesture I had never seen a judge use in all my years facing courtrooms. Riley stood beside them, not speaking, just looking at me. That look was not cold, not warm, just a wall. A solid brick wall stands between me and my daughter. The hearing took place in room 3. Low ceiling, neon lights flickering in the left corner. I once thought they would fix it. Turns out some things stay broken because no one wants to fix them. Calhoun sat in the judge's chair, opening a file he had probably skimmed only minutes earlier. Brent and Riley stood on the plaintiff's side. I stood on the defendant's side. That position made me understand what my lawyer once said. The truth is not always placed at the center. "Mr. Ellington," Calhoun began, his voice flat like a reading machine, "I have reviewed the file. It clearly lists the accusations: financial exploitation, unfair division of assets, and unjust withholding of family property." I started to speak, but Calhoun raised his hand. "Not your turn." I swallowed the tightness in my chest. Riley stood straight, hands clasped in front of her. Brent leaned slightly, looking confident to the point of irritation. Calhoun continued. "According to the plaintiffs, Mr. Ellington deliberately kept 65% of the company and all real estate, despite promising to transfer the entirety to the family." I let out a quiet, "I never—" Calhoun struck the gavel, a single dry, emotionless thud. "You are exploiting your daughter for profit." He said it without looking at me. He looked at Brent. The sentence felt like a sledgehammer to my chest. I heard blood rushing in my ears. "Your Honor, I did not." "You do not interrupt," Calhoun snapped. "Silver Ridge Court does not tolerate elderly parents forcing children to bear financial burdens." Forcing? I had gifted 35% of the company to my daughter. Where was the forcing? My hand slipped into my coat pocket. Inside, I always kept the small brass compass engraved with my wife's name, May Ellington, 1961 to 2018. May had given it to me when I was the first ground engineer at the basin. "Find the right direction," she said, "and remember, even if I cannot see you, I am always in that direction." Today I held it tight, not to find direction, but to keep myself from saying something I could never take back. "Your Honor," I tried again, keeping my voice steady, "I have documents, transfer records, 3 years of financial statements. I request permission to present—" Calhoun raised his hand again. "The court does not accept evidence unless it has been verified by the plaintiff's legal office." I froze. Since when did a defendant have to submit evidence to the plaintiffs for verification? Brent grinned, tilting his head as if watching a show. I looked at Riley. She lowered her eyes. She did not protest. She did not speak in my defense. She just stood there, still as if letting me sink. The hearing lasted only 25 minutes, but it felt like I had dug a shaft 100 meters deep without oxygen. Calhoun concluded, "Until the matter is resolved, the court orders all assets frozen in their current state. The defendant is prohibited from transferring, selling, or altering ownership of any property, including the Golden House and the remaining shares of Ellington Mineral Consultancy." I heard Riley inhale sharply beside Brent. Brent nodded like a man who had completed only one part of a much larger plan. I walked out of the court. I looked at no one, said nothing to anyone. It was noon, but the light felt dimmed by half. Wind from Silver Ridge whipped my face, cold as metal. I stood on the courthouse steps, still gripping May's compass in my pocket. A small, cold, heavy thing, but enough to keep me standing upright when the whole world leaned toward someone else. In that moment, I understood one thing clearly. I had not lost because Brent was strong. I had lost because they had prepared far longer than I realized, and the most painful thing was not that the system sided with them. It was that my daughter did not side with me. I left the Silver Ridge District Court in Golden with the feeling that someone had slammed a sledgehammer straight into my chest. Not physical pain, but the kind of blow that twists an entire life out of shape. Not pain, just emptiness. Like a large tunnel had opened behind me, and I had not turned around in time to see how deep it was. The winter afternoon in Golden City carried a metallic gray. The sun hid behind clouds, and the wind from the Silver Ridge Range sliced down across the courthouse square like a blade. I held the stack of documents against my chest and walked toward my old pickup truck. The moment I put my hand on the door handle, I heard Brent's footsteps behind me. Not normal footsteps, the footsteps of someone who knows he has won. Steps that sound like he is walking across his own private ground. "I told you," Brent said with a small laugh, a laugh without a trace of humanity. "You can't hold on to anything anymore, Marcus." I turned around. I only meant to say one sentence. "Stop, Brent." But I did not get the chance. Brent placed both hands on my chest. One shove, not strong enough to kill anyone, but strong enough to make a 66-year-old man lose balance. My back hit the edge of the truck, then slid down. The documents in my hands spilled onto the snowy pavement. Geological maps, old survey contracts, red circles marking mine sites from years ago, all scattering like a startled flock of birds. I felt eyes staring at me, not Brent's, from across the street. A food truck, a security camera mounted on the cabin corner, a red LED light blinking, recording. A woman standing at the truck door. She raised her phone and filmed. No, one ran to help me. No one asked if I was all right. In Golden, people are used to watching first before acting, and sometimes they only watch and never act at all. 2 days later, the video appeared on Golden Daily Neighborhood Watch, a local community group of nearly 6,000 people. Title: Confused Old Man Pushed Down by Son-in-Law, Golden Street Today. They did not know who I was. They did not know I had laid the groundwork for all extraction at Southridge Basin. They did not know 18 years of my life were spent underground, twice surviving cave-ins. And they certainly did not know I had once pulled 3 young engineers out of a gas-flooded mine. All they saw was an old man with shaking hands, paper scattered, and a younger man shoving him. One comment below the video: "He should not be driving. Looks like he's losing awareness." Another: "Probably his fault, not the family's." I read every line. I did not feel anger, and arguing would mean nothing. I only felt a cold rock slide straight into my chest. People are quick to believe the worst about the elderly, because believing that helps them feel they will never become the same. That night, I did not turn on the living room lights. I sat alone with an old map spread across my desk, the map of Southridge Basin, where I once worked with May, where we drove the first wooden stakes into the ground for geological surveys. The red ink marked the land where we once stood, where May said to me, "You are not just mining, you are carving a road for the future." That future had now turned its back on me. I stared at the map. The red dot faded under the moonlight coming through the window. I touched that place, the place where our youth once lived, where May's hand once rested on mine, and a slow sentence rose from the bottom of my chest, not as a lament, but as a truth buried for a long time. My family is no longer a family. Wind slipped through the crack of the window, blowing across the map, making the paper tremble like a final breath. And I knew that moment was not when I lost my family. It was the moment I stopped fooling myself that I still had them. That night, the night Brent pushed me to the ground in front of the courthouse, I sat alone in my office, without turning on the lights. Moonlight slipped through the window crack and spilled across the desk, coating the books of Ellington Mineral Consultancy in a pale silver glow, the kind of light that makes everything look brutally real. I opened the old steel cabinet. The hinge let out a dry clank. Inside were ledgers, financial maps, expense sheets I had recorded myself for more than 30 years. Mining taught me one thing: rock does not lie, and numbers do not either. I placed the main ledger in the center of the desk. Cream yellow hardcover, a dried ink dot still clinging to the top left corner, from the day May was still alive, when she said, "Clean papers don't say anything, but wrong papers always leave traces." I began reviewing each item. The first line made me pause. Reimbursement, $4,600. I remembered that trip. A small technical meeting in Glenwood Springs. Maximum budget $2,000, impossible to exceed it. But Brent claimed $4,600. I turned the page. $5,200? Client dinner? In Moab? No, that month I was in Moab alone. Brent said he was sick and canceled. But here was an expense claim, submitted by him. Then the third entry, $6,800. Reno Mining Convention. I stared at those three numbers. They had something in common. All were under 7,000. All were under the mandatory quarterly review threshold of 7,500. I had set myself to avoid checking every small item. I skimmed every line. The anger no longer had room to rise. Every justification became meaningless. Only a cold stone dropping straight into my chest remained. I opened my laptop, logged into the company admin system, the account Brent thought I had forgotten after giving him 35% of the shares. I filtered by Brent's name, then by location tag: Moab, Denver, Reno. The company GPS system displayed Brent's vehicle routes during those 3 business trips. The results: the Moab trip did not leave Denver. The GPS showed his car parked in his home garage for 4 days. The Reno trip, his car drove exactly 8 kilometers around the Northfield commercial area. No airport check-in, no record at the Silverleaf Reno Hotel, as he reported. The Glenwood Springs trip, he only went to Boulder and returned. Actual cost under $300. 3 entirely fabricated reports. Perfect enough that no one would notice unless I checked them myself. I leaned back in my chair, my palms damp. These were no longer isolated signs. This was a pattern. I spent the whole night gathering each entry, each number, each receipt. At 4:22 in the morning, I typed the total formula into the spreadsheet. Enter. One number appeared, $102,400. Embezzled in 18 months. I looked at it. The number did not express emotion. It did not say betrayal. What it showed was the cold precision of every step Brent had planned long before. It said only one thing: they had taken more than $100,000 from me before even demanding the house and the rest of the shares. I closed my eyes. Brent had not lost his temper at dinner. That was not an impulsive reaction. And Riley? Riley had not been surprised. Looking back, her face that night looked like someone watching something already planned. I opened my eyes, looked at the wooden room around me, once filled with Riley's childhood laughter, May's footsteps, the smell of dry pine and machine oil from my days underground. Now the room was as cold as an abandoned mine shaft. Placed my hand on the ledger and whispered a sentence, not angry, not trembling, but like a man excavating a truth buried under thick layers of stone. This is not a reaction. This is a plan. Wind from the Silver Ridge Range slipped through the door crack, flipping the last sheet of paper upward, like a sign that what was unearthed that night was not just numbers. It was the entire truth. I sat at the desk for a long time after gathering all the irregular numbers. The silence in the small room thickened. Only the wall clock ticked, slow, heavy, precise. But the more I looked at the consolidated sheet, the clearer one thing became. This was no longer something I could handle alone. What I had discovered was like small cracks in a mine roof, seemingly harmless, but with enough moisture the entire ceiling could collapse. I needed someone who could track money the way I tracked fracture lines in ore veins. Someone outside the family, outside Silver Ridge, outside every faction. Someone, with no reason to go easy on Brent. I opened the drawer and pulled out the small notebook May used to call the survival book, where I wrote down the names of everyone I had worked with, everyone who owed me a favor or had helped me once in the mines. On the last page was a simple line: Irene Cole, Forensic Finance, Boulder. I immediately remembered a colleague's call months ago. Brent once tried fake expenses with her, but he got away because the amount wasn't big enough. This time, the amount was big enough, and she definitely would not let it go. I looked at that old ore vein map on the wall, then dialed her number. The call lasted exactly 18 seconds. When I hung up, the wind from Silver Ridge blew into the crack again, cold and dry, like something was approaching. The next day, she arrived. The snowstorm from the previous night left a thin layer of ice across the porch. I sat on the step, holding a cup of cold coffee, staring at the tiny cracks in the cement, slowly revealed by the morning sun. I did not know how long I sat there, only that I finally stood up when I heard an engine quietly stop at the gate, a gray Subaru Outback. The door opened. A woman stepped out, her hair tied back, her eyes sharp but tired, the kind of tiredness that belongs to someone who has seen too many ugly truths. She walked toward me and extended her hand. "I'm Irene Cole." Her voice was low, concise, without embellishment. Her name had once been mentioned in a short call from an old colleague. Irene had been a forensic finance specialist for an investment group in Boulder. Brent had once tricked one of her partners with the same expense scam, but the amount had not been large enough to take to court. She had not forgotten. "Thank you for coming," I said. Irene followed me silently into the office. I laid out everything I had compiled on the desk. Every invoice below the audit threshold, every GPS record, the total of $102,400 siphoned out of the company over 18 months. She sat down and opened the files in silence. Page 1, then page 2, then page 3. Her face stayed flat as stone. No reaction, no surprise, not even a flicker of expression. Only the focus of someone who had read so many small financial deaths that they no longer stirred anything in her. Finally, she looked up. "Do you know what you have in your hands, Marcus?" I slowly shook my head. Irene pushed the ledger toward me, tapping the corner with her finger. "You have something they did not expect." She paused for exactly one beat. The precision of a mining engineer. Her voice was not flattering. It sounded like she was reading a sample of ore. "I don't understand," I said. She gave a faint smile, the kind meant for a truth, not for a person. "People like Brent always leave traces, but you look at numbers the way you look at ore veins." I fell silent. Her words cut deeper than I expected. Irene pulled the whiteboard from the corner and grabbed a black marker. "Do you remember how you mapped the ore veins of South Ridge Basin?" I nodded. I did not just remember. It felt as if the whole room suddenly smelled like the rock dust of 20 years ago. "Then today," Irene said, "we mapped something similar." She wrote one name in the center of the board. Brent Parks, 1. The first branch, fraudulent expenses. She circled a cluster, exaggerated dinner invoices, inflated business trip reports, dozens of small charges of only a few thousand each, just enough to avoid review. Then she said, "Altogether, this is a whole stream of money drained out of the company." 2. The second branch, trips that never existed. She listed the 3 places Brent claimed to have traveled. Next to each, Irene wrote the actual GPS locations. Completely different. "These trips," she said, "exist only on paper. In real life, they are as hollow as an abandoned quarry." 3. The third branch, lobbying connections. Irene wrote 3 large words, Silver Ridge Lobby. Then she asked me, "Does Brent know anyone in this group?" I answered, "I'm afraid he does." The parties he bragged about, the handshakes at hunting club meetings, the vague stories about connections at the county. All suddenly made sense. 4. The fourth branch, the judicial pipeline. Irene wrote, Judge Richard Calhoun, Silver Ridge Elk Lodge. One line connected everything. I looked at that name, and my hand unconsciously tightened around May's compass in my jacket pocket, the object I always kept when I needed direction. How long have Calhoun and Brent known each other? Irene asked. At least 8 years, I answered, since Brent worked at Apex Minerals. Irene nodded. Then this isn't just embezzlement. She drew a large circle around everything and wrote, Coordinated scheme. My small wooden office felt like an underground control room of a mine. The air thickened. Everything looked bigger and darker. Irene stared at the board. I stared at the board. Those lines, those money veins, branched from Brent outward just like the Silver Ridge mine map of 2001, where I once led the project. Not just embezzlement, not just betrayal, but a structure, a system, a vein running deep through every layer of Silver Ridge County. Lobbying, courts, finances, family. Marcus, Irene finally said, her voice low but firm, you did not lose because you were weak. You lost because you were fighting an entire network. I walked closer to the board and placed my finger on the line, Calhoun Elk Lodge. Do you think? There will be evidence, Irene answered instantly without hesitation. If an ore vein exists, there will be rocks that carry its trace. If a money vein exists, there will be transactions that carry its trace. She looked at me, not with encouragement, but with declaration. And I know how to dig them up. When she left, near 10 at night, snow had begun falling again. I stood in my office, the desk lamp casting yellow light across the diagrams. I looked at the board, the financial veins stretching like ore veins, and whispered, They are not reacting to me. They have prepared. This is not some sudden outburst. It is a plan long in the making. I paused, my voice dropping like a stone rolling down a mountain. This is the plan. Outside, the wind slid through the pines, and it was not the sound of the wind, not the sound of snow. It was the sound of a vein about to collapse, and to me, it was the first sign that I had struck their weakest point. The morning in Golden was covered in low fog, the northern range half hidden behind it. Irene arrived earlier than usual. She walked into my office without taking off her coat and set her laptop on the table with the urgency of someone who had just unlocked something others never wanted revealed. Marcus, I found it. Her voice was direct, without detours. I sat beside her. Irene turned the screen toward me. On it was a chain of small companies with different addresses but the same beneficiary, Graham Holdings, LLC. Owner, Darrell Calhoun, cousin of Judge Richard Calhoun. Irene scrolled down. A name appeared, Parks Consulting Services. Representative, Brent Parks. I felt the air in the room thicken. Do you see it? Irene asked. 28% of the shares in Brent's active company were effectively owned by the judge's relative. Not just on paper. Actual ownership, buried beneath layers of filings. I sat still for a long moment, not because I was surprised, but because everything finally began to lock into place. Irene did not stop. She opened the transaction summary. This is the important part. On the screen, a timeline of transactions appeared. Every time Calhoun issued an order favorable to Brent in the lawsuit, Brent sent Graham Holdings a consulting fee. Each fee fell between $4,200 and $6,000, and each appeared within 72 hours of Calhoun's order. The frequency was too consistent to call a coincidence. Irene scrolled to the final summary. Total, $164,800. Brent had not reported for taxes. I stared at that number for a long time, not because it was large, but because it was undeniable evidence. Embezzlement, tax fraud, judicial abuse. Irene said quietly, This amount is enough for the IRS to trigger an immediate red flag. If we file a special report, they will open an investigation within a few weeks. I let out a slow breath. Not relief, but confirmation that I was not crazy, not imagining things. Everything had been planned. And this was the center of the web. Irene stood and walked to the notes board, circling in red the link. Calhoun, Graham Holdings, Brent. To take down Calhoun, she said, we need more than transactions. We need evidence of property, land, and off-record connections. I understood immediately, and I knew who could do that. I took out my phone and searched for a name I had not called in 3 years. P.I. Sarah Tanaka. She had worked for major mining companies, specializing in land record investigations, property histories, and suspicious transfers of ownership. No one read land documents faster than someone who used to work inside that system. The call connected after 3 rings. Mr. Ellington? Her voice was as sharp as ever. I need every property record for Judge Richard Calhoun, all land files, purchase history, and transfers over 10 years. There was a brief silence, the silence of someone evaluating risk. Send me the exact list. I'll start tonight. I looked at Irene. She nodded, a cold, decisive nod like the click of a mining tunnel light switching on. It started, I said. An hour later, my office had turned into a war room. Files were arranged in 3 separate piles. 1, evidence of Brent's embezzlement. 2, financial ties between Brent and Graham Holdings. 3, signs of ethical misconduct by Judge Calhoun. Irene said, we're not just filing a report. We're submitting the strongest judicial misconduct complaint the Ethics Council has ever seen. She opened a new file. This time, no metaphors, no comparisons. Just truth. Clean. Sharp. Absolute. Marcus, she said, everything you gathered. It's rare for someone outside the legal field to do this with such precision. I answered, my voice low. I'm not extraordinary. I just don't want to drown without knowing who pushed me in. Irene looked at me. Her eyes, for the first time, held not just professionalism, but real respect. Then we'll make them gasp for air. We wrote until nearly midnight. Transaction lists, time correlations, GPS proof, invoice photos, the strange share distribution, the undeclared fees, and above all, $164,800 in tax fraud. When the draft was finished, Irene leaned back and let out a long breath. Marcus, this isn't just to save you. This could drag an entire group of people out of the dark. I nodded slightly. We don't back down anymore. Outside, snow began to fall lightly on the wooden roof, each flake like a small, steady tap. I looked at Irene. Tomorrow, I said, we file this, and everything changes. She replied, her voice steady. Tomorrow is when we start digging up everything they buried. The morning I received the news, wind from the Silver Ridge Basin blew relentlessly, so cold that I felt my breath being scraped away little by little. Irene had just opened the door to my office when my phone vibrated, a notification from the Golden District Court. I opened it, just one line. Emergency petition filed. Declaration of incapacity, Parks v. Ellington. Filed by Brent Parks. I read further. Based on the circulating video showing the subject exhibiting signs of loss of balance, reduced cognition, unstable behavior. I gripped the phone so tightly my knuckles whitened. The video of me falling in front of the courthouse, the clip the entire Golden area had shared for 2 weeks. Something I kept telling myself was only a small incident. Now it had become a legal weapon. Irene stood behind me, skimmed it, then let out a sharp exhale. They're officially playing as dirty as possible. Only 3 hours after Brent filed the petition, Judge Calhoun had already signed the order. Mandatory psychiatric evaluation for safety concern. When I read the word safety, I laughed, not from humor. Calhoun wrote, Respondent Ellington may pose a danger to himself due to cognitive impairment. Impairment? Danger? Just because Brent pushed me and I fell? Irene shook her head. Too fast, too obvious. No verification, no medical review. Marcus, this is blatant abuse of power. The air in the room felt thick and cold, like the fog hanging over Lookout Mountain Pass. 2 days later, I walked into the office of Dr. Helena Strauss, a forensic psychologist in Denver. Her office was bright, spacious, and scented lightly with mint. None of the gloom was found in the places Calhoun sent people he wanted cornered. She invited me to sit. Her voice was calm, unbiased. Mr. Ellington, I've read the court order. I will conduct an independent evaluation, not influenced by any party. Those words were a small beam of light piercing through the dark fog that had surrounded me for months. The evaluation lasted over an hour. She asked about my work history, long-term and short-term memory, planning ability, risk judgment, emotional state after recent events, family, and Riley. I answered clearly. No excuses, no detours. When she asked me to describe the courthouse incident, the fall, I said plainly, Brent pushed me, she asked. Do you feel anyone is watching you or trying to harm you? I answered, not anyone. Only those who did something they think they can hide. She nodded, wrote notes, her expression steady. No judgment, no coldness like Calhoun, only professionalism. When the evaluation ended, Dr. Strauss set down her pen and looked directly at me. Mr. Ellington, she said, her voice solid as stone, I see no signs of cognitive decline, confusion, mental disorder, or dangerous behavior. I heard each word like hearing rock cracking in exactly the right place. She continued, This petition has no basis. I will clearly state in my report that you are fully capable of managing your assets and making your own decisions. Then she added one more sentence, soft but loaded. And I will also note that the video does not reflect mental health issues, but simply a push. I bowed my head. Thank you. Not because I had won, but because someone finally looked at the truth without being bought. That night, I returned home under golden streetlights as snow began to fall lightly. Irene was already waiting at the work desk, the judicial misconduct complaint, nearly finished in front of her. I placed the envelope containing Dr. Strauss's report on the table. She confirmed I'm completely fine. Not a single sign of instability, I said. Irene opened the envelope, skimmed it, then looked up. A faint smile appeared, brief but real. Marcus, she touched the stack of documents. Calhoun, Brent, Graham Holdings. This is the final piece. I looked at the large noteboard on the wall, the dense connections, the dirty money flows, $164,800 unreported, 28% ownership, the irregular court orders, and now undeniable proof that Calhoun abused his power to destroy me. Everything had linked together. Everything had reached its boiling point. Irene gently slid the complaint toward me. Tomorrow, Marcus, we drag the entire network into the light. Outside the window, snow fell thicker. Not the snow of winter, the snow of the night before justice begins to ferment. That morning, Golden was covered in a thin veil of fog, sunlight not yet able to break through the black pines, before the Silver Ridge Basin. I, Irene, P.I. Sarah Tanaka, and my new attorney, Daniel Kowalski, sat around the old wooden table in my office. 4 people, each holding a different piece, all looking at 3 folders laid neatly in front of us. The air was thick, like the moment miners wait for the detonation signal at the mouth of a tunnel. Everyone was silent. The coffee cups on the table were still steaming, yet no one touched them. Only the sound of paper shifting and the scrape of pens crossing lines echoed, like mapping layers of rock underground. Daniel nodded first. It's time. Irene placed her hand on the first folder, her voice low and firm. 1, filed for the Judicial Conduct Board. This was the thickest, heaviest one. Evidence that Calhoun had financial ties to relatives inside Graham Holdings. Consulting fee payments. Brent received only a few dozen hours after each favorable court order over $164,000 of undeclared income. The decision forcing me into a capacity evaluation without review. Hallway video of Calhoun shaking Brent's hand. Traces of their relationship from the Silver Ridge Elk Lodge. Daniel said clearly, "This goes to the Judicial Conduct Board. They're independent, untouched by Golden. Credible evidence forces them to investigate." Irene closed the folder. This is the first blow, the one that stops the entire machine. 2. Civil lawsuit, forcing Brent to repay every dollar he stole. The second folder was thinner but sharp as a blade. A total of over $102,000 siphoned by Brent, GPS proving 3 business trips were fake, dozens of small expenses meant to dodge review, altered receipts and paper trails showing 18 months of fraud. Daniel explained, "This goes straight to civil court. Calhoun has no role. Once the court opens discovery, we peel back every layer of his fraud." Sarah Tanaka smiled. "Brent will have to explain every line, and none of it is explainable." 3. The IRS file, the final shot, no one escapes. The third folder was the thinnest but most dangerous. Over $164,000 of unreported income. Consulting fee payments with signs of transaction laundering. A timeline matching perfectly with Calhoun's orders, enough to trigger a tax evasion investigation. I signed under sender. My hand shook slightly, not from fear, but because this was the final step. Daniel said, "The IRS answers to no judge. Once they step in, no one can interfere." Irene concluded, 3 strikes, within 72 hours, 3 independent authorities. Then she looked at me, and none of them listened to Calhoun. I touched May's compass in my pocket, confirming the direction was right. 72 hours later, 3 envelopes left. Golden, the judicial misconduct file sent to the Denver Judicial Conduct Board. The civil lawsuit filed with the Colorado Civil Court. The tax evasion report submitted through the IRS investigation system. No fireworks, no cheering, only silence, heavy as stone, the silence of truth thrown into an entire system. And I knew, from here, everything would begin to shift. And then we waited. 10 days later, the rock began to crack. One cold afternoon, Irene burst into my house without removing her coat. "Marcus!" She set her phone on the table. The board announced it. I looked at the screen. "Judge Richard Calhoun, temporarily suspended pending investigation." I read each word slowly. Calhoun was officially suspended. All signing authority revoked. No longer allowed to preside over my case, and he could no longer shield Brent. The room felt like it suddenly had more oxygen. Daniel called right then, "Marcus, your case has been reassigned to Judge Amelia Hart." I held my breath for a beat. I knew that name. All of Colorado knew it. Known for absolute integrity. A firm, unflinching judicial style. No ties to any lobbying groups. No affiliation with any circle or lodge in the Silver Ridge Elk Network. And most importantly, immune to all political pressure. Irene sat down, exhaling, soft but long. "Marcus, this isn't just a judge change." She looked at me, her voice deep. "This is a fate change." I didn't answer immediately. I walked to the window, looked out at the Silver Ridge Range. The snow had stopped. The gray clouds had split open. Sunlight slid down the rocky slopes, revealing dark veins like a newly opened ore layer. I touched my pocket, feeling May's compass warm in my hand. "May," I whispered internally, "maybe. This time, justice won't lose its way." On the day of the retrial, the Golden District Court was more crowded than usual. In the hallway, the footsteps of attorneys echoed in sharp, metallic beats. No one talked much. Everyone knew this was no longer an ordinary family civil case. This was the unmasking of a network. I walked into the courtroom without looking around, but I could feel the eyes of dozens of Golden residents, People who had seen the clip of me falling, who had whispered that I was losing it, and who were now waiting to see whether the truth matched the rumors. At the plaintiff's table, Brent sat adjusting his tie. His usual confident smile had disappeared. Riley sat beside him, her eyes red from crying since morning. The back door opened softly. Judge Amelia Hart entered. I had heard of her. Tough, sharp, unbiased, unafraid of factions. Not someone who attended mining industry parties, with no relatives in the Elk Lodge. And most importantly, she did not care about rumors. She cared only about documents. Attorney Daniel Kowalski stood first, placing 3 folders on the judge's bench. 1, the fraud of $2,400. 2, the sequence of transactions matching the 72-hour window. 3, the $164,800 of unreported income. 4, the 28% ownership link between Calhoun's relatives and Brent's company. 5, the irregular capacity evaluation order issued by Calhoun. Judge Hart flipped through each page. Every turn of the paper was like a strike cutting through the layers of pretense Brent had built for 2 years. She asked, "Mr. Parks, do you have any evidence that contradicts these transactions?" Brent swallowed. The sound echoed through the courtroom like a rock falling into a shaft. It was a misunderstanding, then? Which part is inaccurate? Hart cut in, her gaze unwavering. Which specific? Item? What date? Which invoice? What amount? Brent froze. Riley lowered her head, tears falling onto her hands. Irene stepped onto the stand. She presented without a tremor. Every reimbursement, the non-existent business trips, the GPS comparisons, every expense kept under quarterly audit thresholds, every consulting fee paid to Calhoun's relative's company, and the total, $102,400. The courtroom stirred. Some people lifted their heads, whispering. Hart struck the gavel. Order! Irene presented the final document, the summary sheet with $164,800 highlighted. This is the amount Mr. Parks failed to report to the IRS, and this is the transaction timeline showing its direct connection to the favorable rulings issued by Judge Calhoun. Hart looked at Brent. Do you confirm or deny the amount of $164,800? Brent opened his mouth but couldn't produce a sound. I had never seen silence grow so heavy. When Daniel continued with the section on how the so-called gift of 35% shares was fraudulent from the moment it was signed, Riley suddenly shot to her feet. Brent, you told me my father was weakening. You said he would never know. Her voice broke, her trembling hand pointing at her husband. You said you were doing this for the family, but it was all for money, wasn't it? Brent tried to grab her hand, but Riley recoiled, as if from a collapsing shaft. Her words burst out, raw, hurting, stripped of pretense. You used me. You used my father, and you dragged me into this filth? The entire courtroom held its breath. The only sound was Riley sobbing. I looked at my daughter, her small shoulders shaking and my chest tightened. Not from triumph, but because this was the first time she was seeing the truth with her own eyes. When Judge Hart rose, no one dared whisper. She read each item, each word clear as steel. The court finds Mr. Brent Parks committed embezzlement, totaling $102,400, failed to report income totaling $164,800, exploited his relationship with Judge Richard Calhoun to manipulate court rulings. Brent collapsed into his chair. Riley covered her mouth as tears streamed down her face. Hart continued. The court orders the cancellation of the 35% share transfer, as evidence shows deceit and bad faith at the time of signing. Mr. Brent Parks must repay all embezzled funds accumulated during the period under investigation. He must answer to the IRS for unreported income and all resulting penalties. Mr. Brent Parks and Mrs. Riley Parks shall pay $39,000 in attorney fees to Mr. Marcus Ellington. A soft gasp rose from the back rows. Then a ripple moved through the room. Faces turned toward Brent. Some recognized him from the video of him pushing me 2 weeks earlier, the two images now merging. Their eyes no longer held pity for me, only contempt for him. Hart closed the file and looked at Brent. Mr. Parks, the court finds that you have not only betrayed the law, but also the family that entrusted you with their faith. The sentence struck like a gentle but lethal hammer. Brent trembled like a man standing on the edge of a deep shaft. He was nothing more than a man who had lost everything, his honor, his money, and the trust of his own wife. Riley stepped one pace away from him, a small movement, yet a final period. The room stood as Hart exited. When the door closed, the courtroom erupted into murmurs. The overhead lights reflected off Brent's pale, twisted face, like an image completely stripped bare, not by force, but by the cold light revealing the truth. Irene placed a hand on my shoulder. "It's done, Marcus." Her voice was soft but deep. Justice just stood back up. I looked at Riley, my daughter, her tear-red eyes looking toward me. No words needed, just a small nod. For the first time in months, I felt that the Silver Ridge Basin was no longer as cold. Nearly 2 months after Judge Hart's hearing, the cold wind of Silver Ridge Basin began to soften. The snow melted into thin streams running down the rock slope behind my house, revealing the coal-black layers I had studied for half my life. I stood in my office looking down at the contract I had signed that morning. Ellington Mineral Consultancy. Sale price, $1,700,000. Buyer, Connor Hale, geologist, 29 years old. Connor was one of the young engineers I had mentored since the days he still carried an intern's backpack. He understood geology, understood risk, understood the value of the field, and most importantly, he had no dirty ambition. I shook Connor's hand in the parking lot as the noon sun shone across the mineral veins running along Golden Ridge. "I'll keep the spirit of the mining trade you taught me," Connor said. I only smiled. This company needed someone young to continue it, and I had something else to do. 1 week later, I signed the paperwork establishing the fund, Ellington Mineral Justice Foundation. The fund was small, but its purpose was clear: to support elderly victims of asset fraud, to provide free attorneys, to set up a counseling hotline, to give financial assistance for family fraud lawsuits, to cooperate with the IRS and Denver Legal Aid, to open investigative files when needed. When the bronze plaque was mounted, I stood looking at it for a long time, not because I was proud, but because I knew if May were still alive, she would place her hand on my shoulder and say the line she always said whenever I stood before a major decision: "If you know you're doing the right thing, you won't be alone." That afternoon, while I was reviewing the foundation charter, there was a soft knock. I opened the door. Riley stood there. Her eyes were red, but not because someone had hurt her, because she was facing herself. "Dad!" Her voice trembled but did not break. I want to apologize. I didn't tell her to come inside. I didn't turn away, and I didn't leave her standing in the wind. We sat at the wooden kitchen table, where May used to cool her apple pies every autumn. Riley spoke through small sobs. "Brent told me you weren't clear-minded, that you didn't know anything. Dad, don't hate me. I was so stupid." I let her speak. Then I placed my hand over hers, the hand once tiny when I first held her as a newborn. "Riley," I said slowly, clearly, "forgiveness is not erasing wrong." She lifted her head, tears rolling down her face. "Forgiveness," I continued, "is the lesson that helps you stand on the right side again." The thin layer of ice between us, built over years, finally dissolved. For the first time, I saw Riley not as someone misled, but as someone newly awakened. News about Brent came weeks later: personal bankruptcy, the IRS opening a 3-year audit, total penalties and back taxes far beyond his ability to pay. termination from Silver Ridge mining tools for severe ethical violations, frozen bank accounts, and many former friends distancing themselves from him like avoiding a mine about to collapse. A man who once threw a glass of wine onto my chest at dinner, who once shoved me to the ground outside court, now had nothing but debt, flagged documents, and a social sentence. It wasn't joy I felt. It was the order of justice returning to where it belonged. By late April, the golden sky was as clear as glass. I brought May's compass and an old Orvane map and climbed to the top of Silver Ridge Basin, the place where she and I once stood when we were young. The afternoon wind swept through the dark pines, carrying the smell of damp soil and the final chill of the season. I opened the old map. The hand-drawn lines from more than 20 years ago are still intact. I placed my finger on the South Ridge vein, remembering the nights May and I spent noting each layer of rock. I tightened my grip on the compass. The needle was steady, pointing straight, not shaking, not drifting, no longer spinning like the stormy months behind me. I looked down at the golden valley sinking under the red-orange sunset, and I said, soft as the wind, but clearer than ever, justice doesn't run. It waits for the one who finds the right direction. On the summit of Silver Ridge Basin, the afternoon light glowed on the compass, as if May were standing somewhere behind me, smiling. My story does not end here. It has only returned to where it belongs, a life standing upright. Not because it won, but because it was right. If you have reached these lines, I want to send a sincere thank you, a genuine gratitude for spending your time, staying with my story. Thank you for listening to a man who seemed to have lost everything, yet still tried to stand up in the dark. If you believe justice may arrive late but never arrives wrong, write the name of the city where you're listening from, and follow the series so you won't miss the next chapters, where each layer of truth will continue to be uncovered like a newly awakened ore vein. Once again, thank you, sincerely, for walking beside me.